Welcome to the start of a new week here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I am Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see that website below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all, and of course, message boards where you can talk with other Pitt fans all day, every day about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. I mean, you know the deal with Panther-Lair.com. And actually today, Monday, the 28th, is the last day for you to take advantage of a special offer we've got right now where you can get a full year of Panther-Lair.com with the best Pitt coverage for just $22. I mean, that's an insane amount. You're talking about less than $2 a month for the best Pitt coverage that you're going to find on the internet, with the promo code RIVALS22. You have to be a first-time subscriber to take advantage of the deal, but you should take advantage of the deal because it's a great offer that we don't, the likes of which we do not often give out. So today, as part of our Black Friday, Cyber Monday special, RIVALS22 is the promo code, $22 for an annual subscription. Of course, we do this here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is our YouTube channel. We have a lot of video content that we put out here, so make sure you subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and turn on notifications. That way, you will never miss any of our live streams or Morning Pitt videos or anything else that we post at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All kinds of exclusive Pitt video content, and we've got it right there, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're here. So the regular season's over. Pitt closed it out Saturday night in rather outstanding fashion. I mean, really, you could not have asked for a better end to the 2022 regular season than a 26-point blowout win over Miami. I mean, straight up, tail whooping, butt kicking. Other words that we used on Saturday night on the post-game show that we use, when we're going live on YouTube after midnight on a Saturday night, we might use different language than we use on the Morning Pit. I mean, this is very professional here. This is the business in front portion of our YouTube coverage on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. But it was dominant. Start to finish, it was total... Excuse me. That's the beauty of live video. I'm not going to restart and retape the first 2.5 minutes just to avoid a sneeze when it's likely that I'm going to do it again. But it was just dominance up and down the field. I mean, Pitt owned that game on Saturday night against Miami in a way that they have not owned many games over the years, really against anyone. Certainly a Power 5 opponent or an ACC conference opponent. And they have definitely not played that way against Miami. I mean, 2017, as monumental a win as that was, as much as that win meant for Pitt that season and beyond, it was not dominance the way Pitt dominated on Saturday night. The 2014 game, the last time they beat Miami, and the last time they beat, the last time they beat Miami prior to 2017, and the last time they beat Miami on the road, it was, again, not like that. That was a Miami team that he quit, but it didn't turn into a 42-16 blowout. It didn't turn into total dominance, which is what we saw on Saturday night. And that was what was remarkable. I thought Pitt had a good chance to win the game. I can't say I expected them to win the game. I probably would have picked them to win the game, but I wouldn't have felt too overconfident about it, and I don't know how much money I would have bet on the prospect of it happening. I definitely would not have, predicted a blowout victory, and one that really Pitt controlled from the start. I mean, Miami drove down the field, looked like they were going to be able to get some things going on offense, and as soon as Servassier Dennis picked off that pass, and took it 67 yards, and Pitt cashed in a couple plays later for a touchdown, that was it. It was over. And quite literally, it was over. I think as Servassier Dennis ran down the field, one by one, the Miami players, I mean, their hearts weren't in it anymore. And I think you could see that, and I think Pitt could probably sense it, and I think they poured it on. You know what I mean? They absolutely poured it on with, like I say, about as good a finish to the 2022 season as you could hope for. And I've used the word perfect a couple times, and that's probably hyperbole, but not much. There were some mistakes, certainly 2 turnovers Offensively, there was some special teams curiosities. There were a few plays where the defense gave up some big gains to Miami. But I mean, on the whole, it was the best game Pitt played all season. In all three phases. It was probably the only time all season we've seen this offense really humming along and the defense really humming along all at the same time. For the most part this season, the defense has been playing really well and the offense has been struggling and holding the team back, costing them wins. In this one, nobody held anybody else back. Everybody picked everybody else up. I mean, there was just as much good offense as there was good defense, and there was a heck of a lot of good defense in that game. And after a season where there's been a lot of strife, there's been a lot of ups and downs, there's been a lot of, tumultuousness and, tribulations and trials and all those different things. I shouldn't say trials. That probably hits a little too close to home. But after such a challenging season, to finish that way against that team in that venue, I mean, that's as good as it gets. You know what I mean? That was perfect. To play your best game in that situation and win like that in that situation, you couldn't have asked for anything better. And now they have an opportunity to finish this season on a 5-game winning streak, to win a bowl game and get to 9-4. And for all the disappointment that this season may have been, and I don't think you're entirely wrong in viewing it that way. We'll talk about that in a second. But for all the disappointment this season may have been, 9-4 is a pretty good record. 8-4 regular season is pretty solid. We've talked about that being the floor for this program, where we want to see this program when they sort of bottom out or have a down year. That down year is only 8-4. It's not 6-6. It's not 5-7, which we've seen plenty of those over the years. The down year is 8-4. The disappointing year is 8-4, and it's become oft repeated on Twitter and in other Pitt fan circles that it does say something about the level of this program and where it is right now, that you do feel a certain amount of disappointment and underachievement in an 8-4 record. And so, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of days, and I think you probably have too, since the end of Saturday night's game, and maybe even before that, because it didn't necessarily hinge on Saturday night's game, but taking into context the entire picture of the 2022 season. Spent a lot of time thinking about what this season is, what this season was, what this season has been. And I think, I think there are several, and we talked about this on the post-game show a little bit on Saturday night, but I think there are different perspectives that you can take, and they're all right, and I think you can take all of them at the same time. You don't have to be on one side or the other. I think you can kind of view the season in different ways. You as an individual can view the season in multiple ways. If you view the season through the context of the preseason expectations, if you view the season through the context of what we were saying in June and July and August, heading into the start of the season, and I remember all the things that I said. I'm not, because I've been thinking a lot about this. I have no interest in running or hiding or pretending I didn't say some of the things that I said over the summer about this team and its potential and what they could accomplish and what they should accomplish and what I expected them to accomplish. I very clearly said if they go 8-4, it'll be, I don't know if I used the word disaster, but I certainly used the word disappointment, because that's what the preseason expectations were. When we talked in July and we talked in August, even after Jordan Addison left, we still talked about this team as being one that should realistically go 10-2. That was my season prediction. And I think I think a lot of people had that kind of prediction. 9-3, 10-2, 11-1. I think you had, most people probably settled in at 10 wins. A lot of people went for 9, and a pretty decent amount of people thought this team would be an 11-1 team in the regular season. And I don't think we were unjustified in making those predictions and having those expectations, because you look at what this team brought back from an ACC championship squad that won 11 games last year. And they lost Kenny Pickett and they lost Jordan Addison, but they brought back the entire offensive line. They brought back all of the other receivers. They brought back all of the running backs and one of the tight ends. And they brought in a quarterback who had a lot of success at his last stop, a Power 5 school. Not to mention everything they brought back on defense, where the only real question marks were outside linebacker. And by the time we got to the end of August, we were looking at that position, outside linebacker, as one that could be really, really good. And I think it ultimately was. It just took a little bit of time to get there. But when you put all of that together, combined with the schedule, combined with the opportunity, it looked like a team that should win 10 games. And I don't look back and say, boy, how did we get that so wrong? I mean, we know what went wrong. Because when you talk about things that I said before the season, I know this very distinctly. I think I probably wrote it, so I could probably find the quote somewhere. But I know I said it on the Panther-Lair show and probably on these Morning Pitt videos, that for Pitt, quarterback play in 2022 would be the difference between going back to Charlotte and going back to 8 wins. And boy, howdy did we get that one right. Because quarterback play ultimately, and by extension, the effectiveness of the offense overall, is what cost them the game against Georgia Tech and what cost them the game at Louisville. And those 2 games, if you win them, you're preparing for Clemson right now. You're getting ready to go to the ACC championship for the second year in a row with a chance to avenge your loss in 2018. If you win those 2 games, 2 very winnable games. Georgia Tech's not good. Louisville's not that good. Put them, they're ranked, and then they lose. Those were winnable games. Those were games Pitt should have won. Those were games that the Pitt we expected Pitt to be preseason would have won and should have won. And quite frankly, the Pitt that played on Saturday night at Miami wins those games. Average to above average quarterback play wins those games. Average to above average production and effectiveness out of the offense wins those games. And this team is what we expected it to be. 10-2, winning the Coastal, going back to Charlotte, and sort of, clenching your fists about Tennessee and North Carolina, about how you let those games get away, because boy, this could have been a special season. While everybody else is sort of sitting back and saying, bro, you just won the 10 games 2 years in a row, and you're going to the ACC championship 2 years in a row. That is a special season. That's how close they were. That's where they were. And we said it from the start. The difference would be the quarterback play. And in those particular instances, for a variety of reasons, the quarterback play was not good enough, and the offense as a whole was not good enough. And it cost them 2 wins, which cost them a 10-win season, which cost them the Coastal Division, which cost them a final trip to Charlotte before this division format goes away. So there's the different perspectives. Because if you look at it through your preseason expectations, this season was a disappointment. Just period, point blank. In August, I thought they'd go 10-2. They ended up going 8-4. Disappointment. And I think that's reasonable. I view the season that way myself. And I think a lot of people do, and a lot of people should. But the thing, and I say this all the time, and this isn't just about Pitt football. This is about all Pitt sports. This is about all sports. That you can't just look at the preseason expectations, because expectations and context change over the course of a season. I always I don't want to say, push back or reject. It never sits well with me when people say, when they get to like the end of a season and say, or the middle of the season, or whatever, and say, okay, but what if I told you in August that this team would do this and be here and do that? And I don't care for that, because to some extent you are going to measure the success of a season against the expectations you had before the season started. You are. But as the season progresses, and this applies to all sports, your expectations are going to change because the context is going to change. There are going to be injuries. There are going to be different situations that pop up. This guy's going to play better than expected. This guy's going to play worse than expected. You never know what to expect. You want to talk about preseason expectations. Since the ACC expanded in 2013, there have been 9 regular seasons played, plus the COVID year. But just take those other 9 regular seasons. The preseason favorite to win the Coastal has only won twice out of those 9 times. It was Miami in 2017, Virginia in 2019. The situation always changes. The circumstances always change. Teams play differently in the season than they are expected to. And as such, our expectations have to change with that context. There was a point this season where Pitt was 4-4. And they had lost 3 out of the last 4 games. They had lost to Georgia Tech, one of the worst losses in the Narduzzi era. They had lost at Louisville, where they had 3 turnovers inside the Louisville 30. And then they had lost to North Carolina, where it looked, you just didn't look like you were in the same class as another team in your division. And so they entered November at 4-4, with bowl eligibility being a not insignificant question mark at that point. There was a non-zero chance that Pitt would not win 2 more games to secure bowl eligibility. And there was it felt like a pretty good chance that they might only win 2 games and finish 6-6, which would be a disaster. I don't know if I would call 8-4 a disaster. I'd say a disappointment. 6-6 would have been a disaster to follow the ACC championship with a 6-6 season. And it loomed as a very real possibility coming out of the month of October. And so the context changed. The context was no longer about how they were going to go 10-2 and get back to Charlotte, or maybe even, start knocking on the door of the playoff conversation. We talked about all of those things in August. That was the context in August. By the end of October, the context had changed. This was no longer a team we were talking about going 10-2. This was a team we were talking about, can they get bowl eligible? How many wins can they rattle off? It's highly unlikely they're going to, this is a 7-5 team at best, and they're going to have to really play better than they have all season just to get to 7-5. Well, when we put it in that context, rattling off 4 straight wins in the month of November, culminating with a blowout win at Miami, where they've won twice in the last 59 years, you put it in that context, and looks pretty encouraging. And I think you can have it both ways. I don't think you have to pick one or the other. There are some miserable people who will insist on picking the one that's most disappointing. But I think you can have it both ways and say this season fell well short of the expectations and is, as such, a disappointment. And also say, you know what? Credit to these kids for how they played over the last month. Credit for these coaches for keeping these kids going in the last month. Credit for this team for continuing to push. And they had to fight. The Syracuse game was a fight. Virginia game, they pretty much, closed out in the first two plays of the game. But the Duke game was another fight. They had a battle in those games. They were not gimmies. And if they had let down at all, if they had pulled back even a little bit, they could have easily lost to Syracuse and Duke. But they didn't. They beat those teams. They kept themselves above those teams. 2 teams that were feeling pretty good about themselves this season, and Duke rightfully so. Syracuse, I think, too. Syracuse had a great start to the season. Those 2 teams were feeling good about themselves, and Pitt is just sort of reestablished that, no, we're still above you in the Coastal Division, for whatever it's worth. And, as this division comes to an end, Pitt pretty much said to those teams, we're still better than you. And then they close it out at Miami like they did. And so I think you can have it both ways. I think you can feel good about how this team finished the season. And I think if they go to a bowl game, whether it's the Pinstripe Bowl or the Sun Bowl or wherever it might be, if they go to that bowl game and win and get to 9 wins, I think you can feel good about going 20-7 over the course of 2 seasons. Winning 20 games in 2 years is a good stretch. And I think you can sort of celebrate that, while also saying, boy, it's too bad they blew it against Georgia Tech. I think that's reasonable. I think that's fair, and I think it's understandable. I really do. We'll talk as the week goes on. I guess I was going to say we'll talk as the week goes on about individual players. There are some guys that I think we got to highlight. Keaton Slovis here, you see him on the screen. We'll have to talk about him and talk about a few of the guys that stood out this year and made big plays and some of the more prominent players. But, a brief thought on next year. And it's almost impossible to talk about next season when you have no idea who's going to be on the team. Let alone talk about how they stack up against the other 13 teams in the ACC, because you have no idea who are going to be on those teams. You really don't know who's leaving and who's coming back. And I can't say, look, after what we experienced this past May, those of us who follow Pitt football should never be surprised by a transfer again. We should never be surprised by it, because we've seen anybody can go. Anybody can leave. And so you've got a bunch of seniors who could potentially leave or come back. You've got underclassmen who are going to have opportunities to possibly transfer. Some of those back channel, contacts are being made and all of that. Who knows? Who knows who could go? Who knows who might stay? I don't expect Izzy Abanikanda to come back. I don't expect Kalijah Kancey to come back. I don't know what Keaton Slovis is going to do. I don't know what Jared Wayne is going to do. There are a lot of question marks. And there are a lot of guys that, you put them into this group and you say, boy, if a whole bunch of these guys come back, there might be a chance for 2023 to be a pretty good season. It's a pretty challenging schedule. It gets more difficult than it was in 2022, and it wasn't an easy schedule in 2022 with 2 Power 5 teams in the non-conference. But if a decent chunk of these guys who can come back do come back, this team should be able to be successful again next year. The defense, I think, there's an expectation now for this defense to pick up where it leaves off and just keep rolling. And maybe at times make you, have you believing that they're even better than they were a year ago when they were pretty good a year ago. The question is on offense, but I really believe if you bring Keaton Slovis back, if you bring back all the offensive linemen that they possibly can bring back, and if you get these receivers back along with Rodney Hammond and Sebo Flemister, now obviously Gavin Bartholomew would be a huge addition, if to keep him around. I think there's a pretty good chance for this offense to build on what it did this year and get better next year and be even more effective next year. I mean, they had their best game of the season, the most well-rounded game of the season on Saturday night. You could talk about the Virginia Tech game when Izzy Abanikanda breaks Tony Dorsett's single-game rushing record, but there was no balance in that game. This game on Friday night, they had like 220 some, or 220, 230 passing yards, 220, 230 rushing yards, something like that. Or maybe it was 240 and 230. But it was almost a near perfect balance in rushing and passing yardage. It was a near perfect balance in rushing and passing touchdowns with 3 each. It was I use that word perfect again, but it really was in terms of a balanced offense. This was as good as it gets. And it wasn't just, oh, look, the numbers lined up perfectly, but clearly they were running the ball better than they were throwing. They were doing both really well. It was a threat anytime Keaton Slovis dropped back. There was a decent chance that Jared Wayne was going to make another play. And there was a decent chance when Keaton Slovis handed the ball off that Izzy Abanikanda or Rodney Hammond or Sebo Flemister were going to make plays. I think there's a lot of potential in this offense. I think it can be pretty good next year. I think there were growing pains this year. I think the injury to Keaton Slovis did not help with those growing pains. I think you already were going to have kind of a developmental phase and a period of adjustment and transition it's one thing to work in spring camp, it's one thing to work in training camp, but once you get into the games, it can be a lot more difficult to move through that process. And then when you get slowed down because your starting quarterback misses a game and a half and he's still sort of slow to get back into the flow and the rhythm of the offense, that makes it even more challenging. What happens if he doesn't get hurt at Tennessee or against Tennessee? Do they win Georgia Tech? Do they win Louisville? I don't know. But they probably have a better chance than what they ended up getting. And so that gives me a little bit of optimism about what this offense could be next year. Probably not going to be a 45-point per game offense, but can be a really balanced offense that can attack you in a couple different ways and do them all pretty effectively, which that's been the goal all along. It wasn't about being, running all the time. It wasn't about being, 50 carries a game, 50 handoffs per game. It wasn't about that. It was about balance. They wanted this offense to be able to attack through the air and on the ground. That's what Pat Narduzzi wanted. All right. It wasn't about Stone Age football. It wasn't about being conservative. There were times when they were intentionally conservative, but that wasn't the overall philosophy of this offense. It was about balance. And we just reached a certain point where you couldn't rely on, shooting for balance was going to put you in more danger than it was worth. And so they did lean more heavily on the run game through October. And you see where it got them. And really, even in the last couple of weeks of September, they leaned more heavily on the run game. And I think even into November, there were stretches where they leaned more heavily on the run game because they couldn't count on the passing game, because the passing game was going to put them in jeopardy more than it was going to help them succeed. Well, on Saturday night, the passing game was helping them succeed. And the running game was too. And it turned into the best game they played all season. So you can collect your thoughts about the season and the expectations and all of those things, and whether they didn't live up to expectations. But you can decide if that matters more than, how you sort of view the way the team rebounded in the final month of the season. Or you can decide if that, what happened in the final month of the season means more than what your preseason expectations were. I tend to go with both. It was a disappointing season in terms of what we thought this team was capable of, and in terms of what I still think this team was capable of. But at the same time, it was a pretty encouraging performance to go 4-0 in November and close out the season like they did, entering the bowl, the bowl postseason at 8-4. It's a pretty good stretch to be on, and kudos to Pitt. All right, keep it tuned in to Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com to get all the Pitt covers. We'll have a lot of recruiting coverage this week for sure, in addition to football, basketball, the other sports that are going on, volleyball, soccer. I mean, there's a lot of good things happening for Pitt sports right now. We didn't even talk about basketball. Oh, my goodness. Pitt's at Northwestern tonight, 9 o'clock tip-off. This is going to be a late game, but it's going to be worth it because we're going to find out a lot about this Pitt men's basketball team tonight when they go to Northwestern for really their biggest, well, not their biggest test of the year. I mean, they've had West Virginia, they've had Michigan, they've had VCU. But here, after this kind of confidence-building run against Alabama State and Fairleigh Dickinson and William and Mary, they're going to go up against the big boys again. And no matter what you think about Northwestern, it's a high-major opponent, and that means it's going to be a challenge. So we'll see this Pitt team is up to. I like how these pieces are coming together. I like what Blake Hinson's doing. I like what Jamarius Burton's doing. I think John Hughley continues to take steps forward after his injury. I think Nelly Cummings will continue to settle in. And obviously Nike Sabandi's been great off the bench in the last few games. We'll see how it goes against Northwestern, though. We'll definitely talk about it tomorrow on the Morning Pitt, so you can look forward to that. And we'll continue kind of reviewing what happened this season. We'll look back at this past weekend in the Coastal Division, the final weekend of Coastal football. We'll talk about what we saw there and just kind of move through the week. We'll have plenty to talk about, so we're going to keep putting these videos out every morning, Monday through Friday, right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks everyone who watched the video today. We appreciate it. Hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Hope you had a great weekend, and certainly Saturday night went well for you, I would say. So I hope you enjoyed it. And like I say, I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you have a great Monday coming up. We'll be back tomorrow morning with another Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.